The lunch rush was in full swing at the McDonald's on Elm Street. Parents juggled trays loaded with chicken nuggets, fries, and sodas, while children giggled and darted between tables. Behind the counter, Macy Thompson wiped her hands on her apron, scowling as she watched the chaos. Her shift had only started an hour ago, but she was already exhausted and irritated. Her coworkers avoided her as much as possible. Macy had a reputation for being curt, sometimes downright rude, especially to certain customers. Today was no different. When the young boy stepped up to the counter, Macy didn't even bother masking her irritation. He couldn't have been older than 6, his wide brown eyes peering over the edge of the counter as he clutched a crumpled $5 bill in his tiny hand. "I want a Happy Meal," he said, his voice barely audible over the din. Macy glanced down at him, her lip curling. "Do you even know what kind you want?" she snapped. The boy hesitated, looking back at his mother, a tall black woman standing a few feet behind him. She nodded encouragingly. "Chicken nuggets, please," he said timidly. Macy huffed and leaned against the counter, making no move to ring up the order. "Next," she called out loudly, ignoring the boy. His mother stepped forward, her face calm but her voice firm. "Excuse me, ma'am, but my son was next. He just told you his order." Macy crossed her arms, her expression tightening. Well, maybe he should speak up if he wants to be served. A tense silence fell over the nearby customers. Eyes turned toward the counter as whispers spread through the room. The boy's mother didn't back down. "I'd like to speak to the manager," she said, her voice sharp now. Macy rolled her eyes. "I don't think that's necessary." But before she could say anything else, a man in a crisp white shirt and a tie emerged from the back. His name tag read franchise owner. Macy's smirk faded as she realized who he was and who the boy's mother really was. And that was just the beginning. The McDonald's incident wasn't the first time Macy's behavior had drawn scrutiny, though it was certainly the most public. Her disdain for certain people had deep roots that stretched back to her childhood in the same town, where her small, mostly white neighborhood was bordered by an affordable housing complex that was home to Black and Latino families. Macy's family had always acted as if they were better than their neighbors. Her father, a gruff man who worked at the local factory, often sat on their porch muttering about how they were changing the neighborhood. Macy absorbed his words like a sponge. The kids from the housing complex would ride their bikes down Macy's street, their laughter ringing out as they dared each other to race up and down the steep hill in front of her house. To Macy, their laughter felt intrusive, their presence an unwelcome reminder that her family's self-imposed bubble wasn't impenetrable. By the time she was 10, Macy had learned how to make them feel unwelcome. She'd glare at the kids as they sped past her house, muttering insults under her breath. But it didn't stop there. One summer, she and a friend left shards of broken glass at the bottom of the hill, hoping to pop the tires of the kids' bikes. When one boy fell and scraped his knees on the asphalt, Macy had laughed from her porch swing, watching as his mother came rushing out to help him. Her behavior didn't go unnoticed. The neighborhood kids began calling her Mean Macy, a nickname that followed her into middle school. When her peers talked about her, it was always with a mix of fear and disdain. Macy's cold glares and cruel remarks had earned her a reputation, but she didn't care. If anything, she reveled in it. One incident, though, had left a mark. At 13, Macy had scribbled racial slurs across the sidewalk in front of her neighbor's house with chalk. She hadn't expected to get caught, but when the family confronted her parents, Macy's father simply shrugged it off. "Kids will be kids," he said, refusing to apologize. But the neighbors hadn't forgotten, and neither had Macy. Their stares, their whispers, the way they avoided her, it all lingered in her mind like a shadow. Years later, as she stood behind the counter at McDonald's, she didn't think about that boy with the scraped knees or the family whose driveway she defaced. She didn't think about the damage she had caused. To her, the past was just a collection of moments that had shaped her into the person she was today. Someone who believed the world owed her respect without her having to earn it. But the past, as it often does, has a way of catching up. And for Macy, it was about to collide with her present in a way she could never have anticipated. Macy's childhood had been steeped in quiet resentment. Her family had moved to the neighborhood before it changed, as her father liked to say. He would often reminisce about how things used to be: quiet streets, polite neighbors, and a sense of community. But as the years passed and new families moved in, his nostalgia curdled into bitterness. Her father's complaints weren't subtle. He'd sit at the dinner table grumbling about the noise from the housing complex or how those people didn't take care of their homes the way they should. Macy's mother rarely contradicted him, simply nodding as she passed the mashed potatoes. "It's not like it used to be, that's for sure," she'd sigh. Macy soaked in those conversations, their words shaping her understanding of the world. To her young mind, the differences her father pointed out weren't just preferences, they were flaws. She didn't see her Black and Latino neighbors as kids with families like hers. She saw them as intruders, as people who didn't belong. By the time Macy reached middle school, the cracks in her carefully curated bubble began to show. Her classmates came from all over town, bringing with them stories, cultures, and experiences Macy had never encountered. While most kids her age were forming friendships across racial and economic lines, Macy clung to her father's ideology. When a group of Black girls invited her to sit with them at lunch one day, she didn't just refuse, she mocked them loudly, using words she'd heard her father say when he thought no one was listening. The cafeteria fell silent, and though the teacher quickly intervened, the damage was done. From that day forward, Macy became a pariah. But being ostracized didn't make her reflect on her actions. Instead, it deepened her anger. She felt targeted, misunderstood, as though she were the victim. She began lashing out more frequently, her behavior growing crueler with each passing year. One afternoon when she was 14, a group of kids from the housing complex walked past her house on their way home from school. Macy, sitting on her porch as usual, yelled something so vile that even her father winced. "That's enough, Macy," he said sharply. But the look in his eyes wasn't disappointment. It was fear. That moment stuck with her. For the first time, Macy realized the power her words held. It wasn't just about making people uncomfortable. It was about control. She could wield her prejudice like a weapon, and she liked the way it made her feel. But power has a way of isolating those who wield it too recklessly. By the time Macy graduated high school, she had no friends to speak of. Her classmates had written her off as a lost cause, and even her parents had grown weary of her constant complaints. "You're going to have to learn to deal with people," her mother had warned her once. "I deal with people just fine," Macy had snapped back. It was a lie, of course. She didn't deal with people. She avoided them, judged them, and dismissed them. It was easier that way, or so she thought. When she applied for the cashier job at McDonald's, it wasn't because she wanted to work with people. It was because she needed money. And the franchise was one of the few places still hiring in her small town. She hadn't expected to stay long, but as the months dragged on, she found herself settling into a routine. But she didn't realize that the same patterns she'd cultivated in her youth, her arrogance, her disdain, her quiet cruelty, were still shaping her interactions. And she certainly didn't realize how much it was costing her. Not yet. The day after the incident, Macy walked into the McDonald's with a knot in her stomach. The dining area was unusually quiet for a weekday morning, save for a few customers sipping coffee or typing on laptops. She thought it was odd but didn't think much of it until she stepped behind the counter and noticed the way her coworkers avoided her gaze. "Macy, Mr. Landry wants to see you in his office," her manager, Linda, said flatly, barely looking up from the cash register. Macy felt her chest tighten. Mr. Landry was the franchise owner, the man who had emerged from the back yesterday after the argument with the Black boy's mother. He rarely came to this location, and when he did, it was usually to address something serious. She knocked on the door hesitantly. "Come in," his voice called out. As Macy entered, she was struck by how calm he looked, his hands folded neatly on the desk in front of him. But his eyes were sharp, assessing her with an intensity that made her want to shrink into herself. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. She sat, trying to look composed, but her trembling hands betrayed her. "Macy," he began, his tone even, "do you know who that woman was yesterday?" "She was just another customer," Macy said, forcing a shrug. His expression hardened. That just another customer is Marissa Allen. She owns 3 McDonald's franchises in this region, including this one. Macy's heart sank. Her son, Caleb, is the little boy you refused to serve, he continued, his voice firm. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done? I didn't refuse to serve him, Macy blurted, grasping for any defense. He didn't speak up, and— Stop, Mr. Landry interrupted, his voice cold. I watched the security footage. I saw how you treated him. And I've been hearing from employees and customers alike about your behavior for months now. Macy's face burned with shame and anger. So what? You're just going to take her side because she's— Careful, he warned, his tone icy. This isn't about sides, Macy. This is about respect, professionalism, and decency, none of which you displayed yesterday. She opened her mouth to protest, but quickly shut it. She could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. Here's the reality, Mr. Landry said, leaning forward. Marissa Allen could end your career with a single phone call. But instead of demanding I fire you on the spot, she gave me another option. She wants you to come to her office tomorrow morning. She said she'd like to have a conversation with you, face to face. Macy blinked, stunned. Why, to humiliate me? No, he said firmly, because she believes in second chances. You should be grateful for that. Grateful? Macy didn't feel grateful. She felt cornered, exposed. You don't have to take her up on it, Mr. Landry continued, but let me be clear. If you refuse, you won't have a job here anymore. And good luck finding another one with this on your record. The room felt suffocating. Macy nodded stiffly, muttering, Fine. As she left his office, her mind raced. A part of her wanted to quit outright, to walk away and never look back. But another part of her, the part that clung to her father's lessons about pride and toughness, felt something unfamiliar. Fear. For the first time, Macy couldn't ignore the consequences of her actions. She had spent her entire life avoiding accountability, blaming others for her failures and shortcomings. But now those choices had caught up to her, and she couldn't outrun them. Tomorrow she would face Marissa Allen. And for the first time in her life, Macy would have to face herself. Macy stood outside the sleek, glass-paneled building that housed Marissa Allen's office, her stomach churning with dread. The sky was overcast and a cold wind cut through her thin jacket, but Macy barely noticed. She stared at her distorted reflection in the glass door, adjusting her blouse and tugging at her jeans. You can do this, she muttered under her breath, though she wasn't sure she believed it. When she finally mustered the courage to step inside, a receptionist greeted her with a warm but professional smile. You must be Macy, the woman said, her tone unreadable. Ms. Allen is expecting you. Right this way. Macy followed the receptionist down a pristine hallway, her footsteps echoing off the tiled floor. When they reached a large corner office, the receptionist opened the door and gestured for her to enter. Marissa Allen sat behind a polished wooden desk, her presence commanding without being intimidating. She was dressed in a tailored navy suit, her hair neatly styled, her expression calm but piercing. Good morning, Macy, Marissa said, gesturing to the chair in front of her desk. Please, have a seat. Macy hesitated before sitting, avoiding eye contact as she fidgeted with her hands. I'm sure you know why you're here, Marissa began, her voice steady. But before we talk about what happened, I'd like to hear from you. What do you think went wrong yesterday? Macy's mouth felt dry. She wanted to say something, anything that would shift the blame, but the weight of the situation silenced her usual defenses. Finally, she managed, I guess I was impatient. Maybe I came across as rude. Marissa raised an eyebrow. Impatient? She repeated, her tone skeptical. Is that all you think it was? Macy's cheeks flushed. I didn't mean to upset anyone. She stopped herself, realizing how hollow her words sounded. Marissa leaned forward slightly, her gaze never wavering. Macy, I'm not here to humiliate you, but I need you to be honest, with me and with yourself. Do you understand why your behavior yesterday was unacceptable? Macy's instinct was to push back, to deflect, but something about Marissa's calm demeanor made her pause. She thought of the boy's wide, frightened eyes, the way his mother had stepped in to defend him. The memory hit her like a punch to the gut. I guess, Macy swallowed hard. I guess I treated him like he didn't matter. Marissa nodded slowly, her expression softening just a fraction. That's a start, she said. But it's deeper than that, Macy. You didn't just dismiss my son, you dismissed his humanity. Whether you realized it or not, your actions sent a message that he wasn't worth your time or respect. That's not impatience. That's prejudice. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Prejudice. Macy's chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to insist that she wasn't like that. But deep down, she knew Marissa was right. Marissa leaned back in her chair, her tone firm but not unkind. I grew up in this town, Macy. I know how it shapes people. I know the biases that get passed down, sometimes without us even realizing it. But those biases don't excuse your behavior. They don't justify the way you treated my son. Macy felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them away. I didn't mean to hurt him, she said quietly. I believe you, Marissa said, but intention doesn't erase impact. You hurt him anyway, and now you have a choice to make. You can either confront these biases and start doing the work to change, or you can keep going down this path and let it define you. Macy looked up at Marissa, her defenses crumbling. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of her choices, not just the immediate consequences, but the ripple effects they had on others. What do I do now, exactly? Macy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marissa regarded her for a moment, then slid a piece of paper across the desk. This is a list of local organizations that focus on diversity training and community outreach. I suggest you start there. And if you're willing, I'd like you to come back in a month and tell me what you've learned. Macy stared at the paper, her hands trembling. Why are you helping me? She asked. Marissa's expression softened further. Because people gave me second chances when I needed them. And because my son deserves to grow up in a world where people are willing to be better. The words hit Macy harder than she expected. She nodded, clutching the paper tightly. Thank you, she said, her voice cracking. Marissa gave her a small, knowing smile. Don't thank me yet. The real work starts now. As Macy left the office, a strange mix of shame and hope swirled inside her. For the first time, she felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar, a desire to change. The first few days after the confrontation with Marissa Allen were some of the most uncomfortable of Macy's life. She had taken the list Marissa had given her and stared at it for hours, debating whether to act or toss it in the trash. The pull of her old habits, the anger, the excuses, was strong. But so was the image of Marissa's calm, piercing gaze and the quiet power in her words. Late one evening, Macy found herself dialing the number for a local diversity workshop. She almost hung up after the first ring, but a cheery voice on the other end greeted her before she could. Hi, this is Jasmine with Unity Circles. How can I help you? Macy hesitated. Her voice felt thick in her throat. I heard you do workshops about, bias? Yes, we do. Our next session is this Thursday evening. Would you like to join? There it was, a choice. Macy felt her stomach churn, but she forced herself to answer. Yeah, I'll be there. Thursday evening came faster than Macy expected. The workshop was held in the basement of a community center she'd driven past 1,000 times but never entered. She almost turned around when she saw the diverse group of people gathered inside, their laughter and conversation filling the air. No one here would want to talk to her, she thought. But as she stepped into the room, a woman with locks and a kind smile approached her. Hi, I'm Jasmine. Welcome. What's your name? Macy fumbled for words. Macy. Jasmine gestured to the circle of chairs. Find a seat wherever you are comfortable. We're about to start. Macy sat at the edge of the group, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. As the session began, Jasmine asked everyone to share why they were there. Most spoke openly about their experiences, some as victims of discrimination, others admitting to their own biases and the harm they had caused. When it was Macy's turn, her voice shook. I said some things to a kid, and his mom, she called me out on it. Told me I needed to figure out why I said what I said. The room was quiet for a moment, but Macy didn't feel judged. Instead, she felt the weight of their attention, their understanding. Jasmine nodded encouragingly. Thank you for sharing, Macy. It takes courage to admit when we've hurt someone. That's the first step. The workshop was uncomfortable, but it cracked something open inside her. For the first time, Macy began to examine the things she had always taken for granted. Her father's words, her own assumptions, the way she had dismissed and dehumanized others without a second thought. Over the next few weeks, Macy continued attending the workshops, slowly peeling back the layers of her prejudice. It wasn't easy. The sessions forced her to confront the ugliest parts of herself, and there were nights when she cried herself to sleep, wondering if she was capable of changing. At work, things were equally difficult. Word of the incident had spread among her coworkers, and many of them kept their distance. Some were openly hostile. One of her fellow cashiers, a young black woman named Tasha, refused to even look at her. Macy tried to apologize one day during a slow shift. Tasha, can I talk to you for a minute? Tasha didn't even glance up from the milkshake machine. What for? I wanted to say I'm sorry for what I did, for how I've been. Tasha finally turned to her, her expression cold. You think sorry means anything to me? To that kid you humiliated? You don't get to just say sorry and act like everything's fine. Macy nodded, swallowing hard. I know, I'm trying to do better. That's all I can say. Tasha shook her head. We'll see. It wasn't the response Macy had hoped for, but it was honest. She knew earning back trust wouldn't happen overnight. As the weeks turned into months, Macy kept attending the workshops and volunteering at local community events. She began listening more, speaking less, and questioning the beliefs she had clung to for so long. Change was slow, painful, and far from perfect, but for the first time in her life, Macy felt like she was moving forward, not just for herself, but for the people she had hurt. Months had passed since Macy first sat in Marissa Allen's office, trembling with shame. Her journey since then had been anything but smooth. Though she had committed to change, the world around her didn't make it easy. People didn't forget her past actions, and she couldn't blame them. But the hardest part wasn't the judgment of others. It was facing herself. One Saturday morning, Macy volunteered to help set up for a neighborhood block party hosted by Unity Circles. The event was meant to bring together residents from different parts of town, wealthier areas like hers in the nearby housing complex she had spent years avoiding. It was the first time she had been back near the complex since she was a teenager. As she unfolded chairs and strung colorful bunting across the playground, a familiar voice cut through the air. Mean Macy. She froze, her heart sinking. Turning slowly, she saw a group of young adults leaning against the chain-link fence. One of them, a tall black man with a knowing smirk, stepped forward. I knew that was you, he said, his tone dripping with mockery. Still making trouble, or are you actually trying to help this time? Macy recognized him instantly. Marcus, the boy who had fallen off his bike years ago because of the glass she and her friend had left at the bottom of the hill. She had laughed at him then, but now she couldn't even meet his gaze. I'm trying to help, she said softly. Marcus let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. Well, I'll be damned. Mean Macy, the do-gooder. What's next? World peace? The others chuckled, but Macy didn't flinch. She forced herself to look him in the eye. I deserve that, she admitted. And I'm sorry for everything. I was awful to you and everyone else in this neighborhood. I can't take it back, but I'm trying to make up for it. Marcus studied her for a long moment, his smirk fading. You think showing up to one block party makes up for years of being a racist bully? No, Macy said firmly. I don't, but it's a start. His expression softened, though he didn't let her off the hook. We'll see if you're for real. The tension broke when Jasmine called out from across the park. Macy, can you grab the drinks from the van? Grateful for the excuse, Macy nodded and hurried away. But Marcus's words lingered in her mind, a reminder that trust wasn't something she could demand. It was something she had to earn. Later that day, as the block party hit its stride, Macy found herself sitting at a picnic table, surrounded by children, painting on paper plates. Among them was Caleb, Marissa Allen's son. He eyed her warily at first, but eventually warmed up when she showed him how to mix colors to make purple. Your mom's really nice, Macy said tentatively. Caleb looked up at her, his small hands gripping a paintbrush. She said you were mean to me, but now you're being nice. Macy felt her throat tighten. I was mean, and I'm sorry. I didn't know how to be nice back then. Caleb considered her words for a moment, then nodded. Okay. It was such a small gesture, a simple acknowledgement from a child, but it felt monumental to Macy. As the sun set and the party wound down, Marissa approached her. You did good today, she said, her tone genuine. Thanks, Macy replied. I know it's not enough, but don't qualify it, Marissa interrupted. It's not about being enough. It's about showing up every day and doing the work. Macy nodded, her chest tight with a mix of gratitude and determination. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't just trying to fix the damage she had caused. She was building something new. As she packed up the leftover supplies, Marcus walked past her, nodding slightly in acknowledgement. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a crack in the wall. And for Macy, it was enough to keep going. 6 months after the incident that had upended her life, Macy found herself back at Marissa Allen's office. This time, she wasn't summoned. She had requested the meeting. Marissa greeted her warmly, offering a seat at the same desk where their first confrontation had taken place. But today, the air between them was different. Less tense. More open. You've been busy, Marissa said, gesturing to a folder on her desk. Inside were updates from Jasmine, feedback from the diversity workshops, and photos from the block party where Macy had spent hours helping. I've heard good things. Macy smiled faintly, though she still felt the weight of the past. I've been trying, she said, not just to make up for what I did, but to be better, to see things differently. I know I can't undo the harm I caused, but I want to make sure I never go back to being that person. Marissa studied her, her expression thoughtful. And what have you learned? Macy hesitated, gathering her thoughts. I've learned that bias doesn't go away just because you say you're sorry. It takes work, listening, reflecting, putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. I've learned that actions matter more than words, but words still have power. And I've learned that being better isn't about earning forgiveness. It's about being someone I can live with. Marissa nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. That's a lot of growth in a short time, but the work isn't over. I know, Macy said quickly, and I'm not stopping. I've started volunteering with Unity Circles. I'm helping with their after-school program now. I want to keep showing up, even when it's hard. There was a long pause as Marissa regarded her, the faint smile still on her face. I think you're on the right path, she said finally. Relief washed over Macy, but it was tempered by the understanding that this wasn't a victory, it was just another step forward. As she left the office, the winter sun shining weakly through the clouds, Macy felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. She didn't know if people like Marcus or Tasha would ever fully forgive her, and she couldn't erase the pain she had caused. But she could choose who she wanted to be now and every day after. The next morning, she walked into the McDonald's on Elm Street for her shift. The air was warmer than usual, and the usual rush of customers bustled in and out. She greeted Tasha with a tentative smile, which Tasha returned barely, but it was progress. As Macy worked the counter, a mother and her young son stepped up to order. The boy, about the same age as Caleb, hesitated before speaking. Macy crouched slightly to meet his eye level, her voice soft and kind. What can I get for you, buddy? She asked. The boy smiled shyly. A Happy Meal? Macy smiled back, punching in the order without hesitation. Coming right up. The mother gave her a curious look, but said nothing. As Macy handed over the tray, she felt a quiet sense of peace. For the first time, she wasn't weighed down by the ghosts of her past. She was simply present, doing her best, one small moment at a time. And in that, she found redemption, not in grand gestures or public approval, but in the steady, unglamorous work of choosing to be better.